Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. I'm going to try and record a share today. If I need to, I'm going to do it in a couple of different shots and I'll upload it in a part 1, part 2, etc., depending on the condition of my voice. So thank you for bearing with me. So we're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're going to be learning today Miras Hashem Daf Chav Daled Amid Aleph. We'll see if we can do more than that yet today. We'll try. So we begin on Chav Gimel Amid Beis near the bottom with Siman Tavkuf Don Aleph Din Shavua Shachal Tisha B'Av Lihiyos B'Seicha, the halachos that pertain to the week during which Tisha B'Av falls out. Uba Yudches Seifim, and here we have 18 Seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Mishenichnas Av Mematin B'Simcha, a phrase that we are all familiar with, comes from a Mishnah in Masechtas Tainis on Chafav Amid Beis. We know that Mishenichnas Av, once we reach the sad month of Av, the month of the Churban Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Sheni, Mematin B'Simcha, we diminish our Simcha. We know that the opposite of that is Mishenichnas Adar, Marbin B'Simcha. Adar is a happy month for Klal Yisrael. We have the Nisim of Purim. So in Adar, Marbin B'Simcha. But in Av, unfortunately, Mematin B'Simcha, we have to diminish our Simcha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mematin B'Simcha. Ayin Magen Avram, he says, take a look at the Magen Avram, Teritzainer Loimar, who says that the Mechaber here means, She'ein Smechin by Klal. We do not experience any Simcha whatsoever during the month of Av. That's what the Magen Avram says, and he brings this from a Taisus in Masechtas Megillah, K'moshe Kasva Taisus Parakama de Megillah. This is as is written in Taisus in the first parak of Megillah, and Avheim and Beis Dibra Maschil Mematin. So according to this Taisus, during the month of Av, we don't rejoice over anything at all. Simcha is anathema. Happiness, rejoicing has no place during the month of Av when we mourn over the loss of the Beis Hamikdash and everything that entails. People, I think, very often don't realize what it is when we talk about the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. It's not only the loss of the Beis Hamikdash and the ability to bring karbanos, that would be enough to mourn over, but it's so much more than that. It's the loss of our whole governmental system. It's the loss of Bezdin. It's the loss of Paiskim. It's the loss of Sanhedrin. It's the loss of so much. It's the loss of the Shulchan that gave us Parnasa, the Menorah that gave us Torah. So it's a tremendous loss, and therefore during the month of Av, says Taisvis, says the Magen Avram, there is no Simcha at all. Now let's take a look at the Sharet Tzion Ois Cotton Aleph, who discusses this Taisus in a little greater detail. Bear with me while I just lubricate my throat a little bit. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharet Tzion Ois Aleph. Hine b'Taisus Ma'iri Sham. Taisus over there in Megillah is not speaking about the month of Av. He's talking le'inyan tainis tzibur shegoizrin b'shvil matar. We know that in the time of the Mishnah, there were times when the Sanhedrin would decree a fast because of a drought. In Eretz Yisrael, you don't have water really without rain. So if there was a serious drought, they would decree a fast day. And on that day, it says Mematin B'Simcha. And Taisus over there says that Mematin B'Simcha means we're not Misameach at all. And the Magen Avram says, well, if you see that Taisus says over there by such a fast day that Mematin B'Simcha means we don't rejoice at all, so too over here when it says Mishenichnas Av Mematin B'Simcha, that also seems to mean we don't rejoice at all. And like the Sharet Tzion says, Achein, from the raya that Taisus brings over there, Taisus brings a raya that he's right. What's his raya? His raya is ilav hachi, because if that's not pshat in Mematin B'Simcha, if you want to tell me that somehow Mematin B'Simcha means we diminish the Simcha, but we still can have Simcha, my shaykh miut. What does this mean to diminish? Eize shir yesh. What's the measurement? If you're going to tell me that there's a halacha that we have to be memayit b'simcha, that we have to lessen our simcha, then Chazal would have to give some kind of shear. They would have to give some way of measuring what it means to be memayit b'simcha. And since the Mishnah doesn't give such a shear, so it must be that memayit b'simcha means no simcha whatsoever. And therefore Taisa says, Muchach tehu adin le'inyonenu. That rationale of Tosfos would seem to apply equally to the concept of Mishenichtas Av Mematin B'Simcha as it does to the concept that you Memat B'Simcha on a fast day for a drought. Okay, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, Be'emes Hurak L'Shitas HaTosfos Desham. This only applies, this is only true, according to the opinion of Tosfos in Megillah. Aval, however, La Tosfos de Perek HaCholitz Taf Bem Gimel Amud Aleph, according to Tosfos in Mesechus Yavamitz, in Perek HaCholitz on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, the Cholka Malzeh, that disagrees with the Tosfos in Megillah, Usvira Lahu, and over there Tosfos says, Da'afilu Liknois Tzarchei Chuppah, that even if you want to buy something that you need for a chasanim, Dehu Simcha, which is definitely, it causes Simcha, Gam Kein Sharei Merish Chodesh Av V'Hala. I'm sorry. Tosfos over there in Achilitz says that that's mutter from Rish Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av. V'had Kamar Mimatin B'Masul B'Matan, and when we talk about lessening, diminishing business, Hu Sheyamait Mimashadarka Linig B'Shar Yomim. You see, in Tosfos and Achilitz is not talking about the concept of Mimatin B'Simcha. Tosfos and Achilitz is talking about the concept that we're going to see soon of Mimatin B'Masa Uvamaton, that we lessen business transactions. And Tosfos says that if you need to buy tzarchei chuppah, you're allowed to buy tzarchei chuppah, even though tzarchei chuppah causes simcha. So it seems that Mimatin means to diminish; it doesn't mean to cancel out completely. And Tosfos over there says, "V'hada karma mimatin b'masuk maton." What that means is sheyimait mimashadarka linog b'shar yamim. You do less than you would do on a normal day. In Cain, if so, Efsher, it's possible that according to Tosfos and Achilitz, to hu adin le'inyan mada karma mimatin b'simcha. Maybe the same thing applies to when the Mishnah says mimatin b'simcha hu gam kein ke'ein zeh. It also means don't be misameach as much as you would during normal times. There's a certain amount that during normal times, a person naturally he experiences simcha, but during Av, you should cut down on your simcha. And it's not necessary for Chazal to give a shear. That's the shear. The shear is a little bit less than what's normal. So that's the possibility that the Sha'ar Tzion throws out over here. It would seem to me that the prevalent custom is like this second shot that the Sha'ar Tzion is forwarding, that we are mimayit b'simcha, we lessen our simcha during Av, but we don't necessarily cancel out all simcha. Doesn't mean that everybody walks around with a long face the entire Av and never smiles. We lessen, definitely, we have to be cognizant of the loss, we have to be cognizant of mourning over the Churban, but it doesn't mean that we have to cancel out simcha completely. That's the possibility that the Sha'ar Tzion is throwing out, according to Tosfos in Yavamis. Okay, now we go back to Sif Aleph to the Mechaber. Continues the Mechaber. Ubar Yisrael de Islay Dina Bahade Kuti. If a Yid has litigation that's pending together with a non-Jew, Lishtamit Minei. Literally, the words Lishtamit Minei means he should avoid him. If you have litigation pending with a non-Jew, avoid the non-Jew. If you could postpone the litigation, postpone the litigation. Don't have a court case during the month of Av, Ria Mazle, because your mazel, the mazel of a Yid, is poor. The mazel of a Yid is bad during the month of Av. Now we know that really Klal Yisrael is lamayla min mazel. A Yid is not dependent on mazel. A Yid is dependent on hashkacha pratis. A Yid every minute is dependent on the Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rabbeinu Shalom is taking care of you with hashkacha pratis every second of every minute of every hour of every day. So what does this mean that you should avoid it? Because Ria Mazle. So the Sfarim bring down that yes, it's true. A person is completely up to the hashkacha pratis of the Rabbeinu Shalom. Yet, it also depends on how much amunah and betachin a person has. It's very nice for a person to say, I don't have to worry about Ria Mazle. I don't have to worry about the poor mazel of the month of Av because I'm totally on the hashgacha pratis of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Do you really feel on a constant basis that you're totally on the hashgacha pratis of the Rebbeinu Shalom, that now you could afford to look away from the concept of Riyah Mazlei? So there is such a thing as Riyah Mazlei. There is such a thing as the month of Av is not a good month for a Yid. Therefore, if you could avoid the litigation, you avoid the litigation. Says the Mishnah Berurah's cut and bays. Lishtamik minei, you should avoid the non-Jew. How long? Does this go for the entire month of Av, or does it go just until Tisha B'Av? Says the Chafetz Chaim, Ad Rosh Chodesh El. He brings down from the Magen Avram that really, yes, you should, the Riyah Mazlei applies for the entire month, and you should avoid the litigation all the way until Rosh Chodesh El. But the Chafetz Chaim says, V'al kol panim ad achar Tisha B'Av, at least until after Tisha B'Av. And in the Sharet Tzionis Cut and Bays, the Chafetz Chaim says that this al kol panim ad achar Tisha B'Av is based on a carbon nesanel on the Rosh. The carbon nesanel on the Rosh says that for certain until Tisha B'Av, but after Tisha B'Av, it's not as critical. Okay, now we go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah, Hagah. Mila shehi meresh chodesh ad Tisha B'Av. Let's say somebody has to make a bris mila. Baruch Hashem, somebody has a simcha, and he's scheduled to make a bris at some point between Rosh Chodesh Av and Tisha B'Av. Says the Ramah, Noyagin, the custom is Shahamayel, the mayel, that's the one who actually does the cutting of the bris, Ubal habris, and the Baal bris. Now, you would think when you see the words Baal bris, you would think that that means the Avi Haben, the father of the Rachanimoil. However, it does not. The Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us it means the Sandik. So the Ramah is telling us that the mayel, the Baal bris, which is the Sandik, V'avi Haben, and the father of the Rachanimoil, Loivshin Big Day Shabbos, they're allowed to wear Shabbos clothes, Avo Balav Hachi Aser. But without the reasoning of the bris, you do not wear Shabbos clothes from Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av. There's no Shabbos clothes. I will discuss that in greater detail. Let's focus on the question of the bris right now. Says the Mishnah Berurah on Chav Gimel Lamed Beis, Ois Katan Gimel. The Ramah said that the Moel and the Baal Habris, says the Chafetz Chaim, who's the Baal Habris? Hainu oisai shetoifes atinoik al birkav b'shas hamila. This refers to the sandik who is going to hold the baby on his knees during the performance of the bris. So that's who we call the Baal Habris. The sandik, it's a tremendous yom tov for the sandik, the day of a bris. So far we have, according to the Ramah, we have the Moel could wear Shabbos clothing, the Sandik wears Shabbos clothing, and the Ramah said straight out, the Avi Ben, the father of the baby. Continues the Chafetz Chaim here, the last few words of Chav Gimel Lamed Beis, Aval hamachnis v'hamoitzi hatinoik, the ones that bring the baby into the bris and take the baby out from the bris, shekorid kvater, who we call the kvater, einoi bechlal zeh, according to the first opinion, according to the opinion that the Mishnah Berurah brings down here in the text of the Mishnah Berurah, he says that the kvater is not included. And the kvater and the kvaterin, the man and the woman who bring in the baby and bring the baby back out from the bris, they do not wear Shabbos clothing. However, continues the Chafetz Chaim, umikal mokim, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Aval hamachnis v'hamoitzi hatinik shekern kvater, this is a reference only to the man. The man, the kvater, who brings the baby into the bris and brings the baby out from the bris, einoi bechlal zeh, he does not wear Shabbos clothing. When we come makam, he says the Chafetz Chaim, nevertheless, ha'isha, the woman, the kvaterin, ha'isha hamachneses atinoik, the woman who brings the baby into the bris, so the kvaterin, the woman, hands off the baby to the kvater, noiheges lil boish big day Shabbos, the minig is that she does wear Big Day Shabbos. Why is she different than the man? Shezeh ikar mitzvasa, because that's the ikar involvement of the woman by the bris is that she takes the baby on the woman's side and she brings the baby to the kvater to give the baby to the kvater who's going to bring the baby into the bris. They don't have any other involvement in the bris ceremony. So since that's the ikar mitzvah of the woman that's involved in the bris ceremony, she could wear Big Day Shabbos. Now, if you look back at Chav Gimel and Beis in Sharet Zion Ois Cotton Gimel, the Chavetz Chaim says that he says that the Sandik, that the Bala Bris is a reference to the Sandik. He brings that for the Magen Avraham. Now, the Mishnah Berurah continued, and he said that the Kvater, the man who brings the baby into the bris, does not wear Big Day Shabbos. However, over here it says the Chavetz Chaim in the Sharet Zion, Ubesefer Eliyah Rabbah Mitzaded, in the Sefer Eliyah Rabbah, they take the position the Gam Hamaknis v'Hamoitzi Hu Lozek Kebala Bris, that the Kvater, the man who brings the baby into the bris, has the same din as the Sandik, and therefore he does wear Big Day Shabbos. Now, I know I took a look in Reb Simcha Bunim Cohn's Sefer on the 3 weeks and on Tisha B'Av, printed by Art Scroll, very, very nice Sefer, and he brings down over here that the prevalent custom seems to be that when you have a bris during the 9 days, the parents of the baby, the grandparents of the baby, the baby's siblings, the moyel, the sandik, and the kvaterin, the woman who brings the baby in, all wear Big Day Shabbos. And he writes over there that there's no accepted minig when it comes to the kvater. We saw over here a question on the kvater. We have the Chavetz Chaim writing in the Mishnah Berurah that the kvater does not wear Big Day Shabbos, and we have the suggestion from the Eliyah Rabbah in the Sharet Zion that the kvater does wear Big Day Shabbos. Reb Simcha Bunim Cohen writes in his footnote that we don't seem to have an accepted custom when it comes to the kvater. If somebody were to ask me the shaila, my response would be, we find in many places that the Mishnah Berurah is not machriya. In the Mishnah Berurah, he doesn't rule conclusively in the Mishnah Berurah itself, but he is machriya in the Sharet Zion. So from the fact that the Chavetz Chaim brings down this Eliyah Rabbah in the Sharet Zion, that's a clue to me that the Chavetz Chaim was leaning towards being machriya, that the kvater can wear Big Day Shabbos by the bris. Okay. On Chav Daled Amud Aleph, Mishnah Berurah is cut in Daled. The Ramah said that the Avia Ben, the father of the baby, the father of the Rachanimoil, can wear Big Day Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Avia Ben v'imay. This also applies to the mother. The mother could certainly also wear Shabbos clothing by her baby's bris. Now we go back up to the top line in the Shulchan Aruch. We continue with the Ramah. The Ramah said, "Ava balav hachi aser." Without the I don't know if I want to use the word excuse of the bris, we do not wear Big Day Shabbos during the 9 days, because wearing Big Day Shabbos is a sign of simcha. It's a sign of happiness, a sign of rejoicing. So we don't wear Big Day Shabbos during the 9 days. Continues the Ramah, afilu b'Shabbos shel Chazon, even on Shabbos Chazon. So that's the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, when we lay in Chazon Yeshayahu, Ein machlifin lilboish Big Day Shabbos. The Ramah rules that on Shabbos Chazon we do not change into Shabbos clothing. Ki im hakutainas levad, only the kutainas. Now the kutainas, I'm not 100% sure what garment the Ramah was referring to when he said kutainas, because the Mishnah Berurah says that the reason the Ramah says you could change your kutainas is because it's something that you change because it gets sweated up. It's not something that you change for simcha. Sounds to me like an undershirt. I don't think it means the shirt. So the Ramah over here is ruling that on Shabbos Chazon we do not wear Shabbos clothing. Ki im hakutainis lavad. Only something like an undershirt we could change. And he brings this from the Mordechai, from the Goyes Ashri, and from the Aguda, and from the Rekeach. Now, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut in hay. Ein machlifin. We don't change into Shabbos clothing. Va'afilo hatalis. We don't even wear a Shabbos talis on Shabbos Chazon, according to the Ramah. Oleinin giluach when it comes to taking a haircut or shaving, in mutter lebal bris ukahai gavna, whether the bal bris is allowed to take a haircut for a bris, ayin b'shari tshuva, he sends you to the shari tshuva. And once again, I'm going to mention what Rav Simcha Bunim Kohn writes in his beautiful sefer. He writes from Rebbe Yashiv. This shari tshuva over here, it's a very, very lengthy shari tshuva that begins on Chav Gimel Amud Beis, shari tshuva Eis Katan Gimel. He brings down a panim mi'irais. The panim mi'irais, he brings down a shita from the panim mi'irais that the parents of the baby, the sandik and the moil, can all take haircuts. And Rabbi Yashiv Zechet Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Vracha seems to say that the prevalent minig is to rule like that panim mi'irais. It's funny that the Chavetz Chaim put this into Mishnah Berurah is Katan Hay when the Ramah seems to have already moved on to a different question. But okay, nevertheless, that's where it is. Now we go to Mishnah Berurah is Katan Vav. So the Ramah said that on Shabbos Chazon we don't change into Shabbos clothing. Kiyam hakutones lavad, we only change this kutones. Says the Chavetz Chaim, she'eino loivesh ela mipnei hazeya. This is a garment that you wear for protection against perspiration, and that's why I'm calling it an undershirt. And that's why you're allowed to change it l'chvod Shabbos. It's not like a fancy Shabbos shirt. That's not what it is. Umitam zeh, and based on this rationale, mutar lahachlif gam hapuz mikois. You're also allowed to change your socks. Socks is also, even though nowadays, my personal opinion happens to trouble me. I sometimes poke fun at the yeshiva bachurim. I tell them they're wearing their sister's socks, as you have nowadays walking around with colorful socks with stripes and who knows what, all types of decoration. I don't see why a yeshiva man should be wearing such a thing. But nevertheless, you could change socks, because again, that is something that you change because of perspiration, because of odor. So the Chavetz Chaim says you could change your socks. Changing socks would be mutter, even if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos itself, so that Shabbos Chazon is actually the day of Tisha B'Av, and the fast of Tisha B'Av will be a nidcha on Shabbos. Now, many of you might be scratching your heads, and you're saying to yourselves, I never heard of this, not to put on Shabbos clothing on Shabbos Chazon. So, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ubekehilas Kaidish Vilna, in the holy city of Vilna, city of the Vilna Gaon, Noyagin al pi hagra, they had the custom to follow the opinion of the Gra, Lil Baish Big Day Shabbos, and they did wear Big Day Shabbos on Shabbos Chazon. V'yesh mishanim beged echad, there were those who would leave one article of clothing like they do during the week. So maybe they would put on their Shabbos suit, but leave on a vachadika shirt, or maybe wear their vachadika hat. They would, one garment they would wear weekday, but everything else they would change. V'chein kasav Rabbi Yaakov Emden, b'shem Aviv Agoyin, Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes in the name of his father, shetzarach lil baish Big Day Shabbos, afilu b'Shabbos shachal b'Tisha B'Av, that you do wear Big Day Shabbos, and you wear Big Day Shabbos even if Shabbos Chazon falls out on the day of Tisha B'Av itself. Again, the prevalent minig seems to be that we do wear Big Day Shabbos. They bring down from the Ari that the Ari was naig to wear Big Day Shabbos. As far as why there's a difference of opinion, do you wear Big Day Shabbos or not? So one very obvious argument to make for the custom of wearing Big Day Shabbos is we know that on Shabbos we're not naig any avelus befarhesia. And not to wear Big Day Shabbos would certainly seem to be a declaration of avelus befarhesia. And that's why we would not wear Big Day Shabbos on, that's why we would wear Big Day Shabbos on Shabbos, because to not to wear Big Day Shabbos on Shabbos Chazon is a declaration of avelus befarhesia, and we don't want to do that. As far as why, as far as the justification for the minig not to wear Big Day Shabbos on Shabbos Chazon, so there are different pshatim that are brought down. The Aruch HaShulchan seems to suggest that it really depends on what the difference between the Big Day Shabbos and the Big Day Chol are. For example, let's say you're a Hasidic Yid, If you're a Hasidic Yid, there's a very great difference between your Malbushe Chol and your Malbushe Shabbos. During the week, you're wearing an up hat or some other kind of Hasidic hat. During Shabbos, you're wearing a shtreimel. Now, the difference between the shtreimel and the weekday hat is a very pronounced, very public difference. Therefore, if you don't wear the big day Shabbos, it's avelus b'farhesia. But let's take a balabatisha, litvisha, yeshiva man. I'm attaching so many labels. Most of you know by now that I abhor labels. But you take somebody who wears a suit. He wears a suit all week. I mean, I'm wearing a black suit right now. I have a black suit for Shabbos too. My black suit that I wear on Shabbos happens to be a black-on-black suit because I want it to be nicer, and it's a higher quality suit. But this is a black suit, and essentially that's a black suit. The hat that I wear on Shabbos and the hat that I wear during the week are, right now it happens to be, because of COVID, I haven't been able to go buy a new one. Right now they are the same hat. But it's, even if it wouldn't be the same exact hat, it would be the same style hat. Just the Shabbos one is a higher quality one. So, by some people, the discrepancy between the weekday clothing and the Shabbos clothing, says the Aruch HaShulchan, is not that great. And if that's the case, then wearing the weekday clothing is not necessarily a display of avelus b'farhesia, because it's not so boilet. And that might be a justification, suggests the Aruch HaShulchan, for the minhag to wear weekday clothes on Shabbos Chazon. But again, it seems to be the more prevalent custom nowadays that we do wear big day Shabbos. Okay, now we continue in the Ramah. By me, it's on the third line, middle of the line. So, the Ramah said we don't wear Shabbos clothing on Shabbos Chazon. However, Parson Paroiches Shal Shabbos. In a shul where they had a special Paroiches for Shabbos. I think most of our shuls nowadays, the same Paroiches stays on most of the year. They have a different Paroiches maybe for Yom Tov and a white Paroiches for Yomim Noraim. But generally speaking, for most weeks of the year, it's the same Paroiches. But some places had a minhag to have a Shabbos Paroiches, beautiful minhag. If you have a Shabbos Paroiches, aval Parson Paroiches Shel Shabbos. For those of you who might not be aware, the Paroiches is the reference to the curtain in front of the Aron HaKodesh, the curtain that closes off the Aron HaKodesh. So aval Parson Paroiches Shel Shabbos, you could put on the Shabbos Paroiches in shul. Imlai she'era Tisha B'Av b'Shabbos v'nitcha, unless Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos itself, and it's a nitcha, sha'az ein Parson Paroiches Shel Shabbos. When Shabbos Chazon is Tisha B'Av itself, then we do not put on the Shabbos Paroiches. Umi sheyesh lo nisuin b'Shabbos Nachamu. Let's say somebody is getting married during the week of Shabbos Nachamu. So he's getting married during the week after Tisha B'Av. The Shabbos after Tisha B'Av is Shabbos Nachamu. So let's say somebody's getting married that week. So his offer for Shabbos Nachamu, Mutter Lilbaish Big Day Shabbos, he is allowed to wear, the chassan is allowed to wear Shabbos clothing, B'Shabbos Shel Chazon, on Shabbos Shel Chazon. Shabbos Chazon is his offer, he's allowed to wear Shabbos clothing. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ice Cut and Zion. The Ramah said you're allowed to put on the Shabbos Paroiches. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hu adin mapais o michsa'is. It's not only a reference to the Paroiches, you're also allowed to put on the Shabbos Bima cover, the Shabbos Amud cover, all of these type of things you're allowed to put on the Shabbos ones. Ice Cut and Ches, the Ramah said that the chassan on his Afraf is allowed to wear Big Day Shabbos. Vaf Aviha Chassan V'Akala, so too the father of the chassan and the father of the kala, Loivshin Beged Elyon Shel Shabbos, their outermost garment, they could put on a Shabbos garment, L'chvayid Chassan V'Kala, in honor of the chassan and the kala. Ice Cut and Tes, Big Day Shabbos. While they're allowed to wear Shabbos clothing, they're not allowed to wear new clothing. So the chassan, let's say, would not be allowed, if he bought a nice new suit, he bought a nice chasana suit, and he bought a nice suit for Sheva Brachas, maybe he was thinking to wear the Sheva Brachas suit for the Afraf, he's not allowed to. If it's a new garment, he's not allowed to wear it. Eyes cut and yud, b'Shabbos Shel Chazon, fa'afilu chal Tisha B'Av b'Shabbos, even if Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos itself. And now we go back to the Shulchan Aruch and we continue with Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, Meresh Chodesh ad Hatainis, from Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av itself, till the fast of Tisha B'Av. Mematin b'masa uvematon. This is brought down from a brisa in Parak HaCholitz in Yavamas on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. From Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av, we are memayit, we lessen masa umaton, which means business. We do less business than usual. Let's take a look at what that means. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Yud Aleph. Mematin b'masa umaton, we lessen the amount of business that we do. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Yesh min ha-paiskim, there are those paiskim, and in the Sharet Zion he brings this down from the Pri Megadim. Desvir lahu, who hold, dahainu shalo yisa b'masa umaton shel simcha. When the Brisa says that during these days of the 9 days we're memayit and masa umaton, doesn't mean that we don't do any business whatsoever. It means that we're memayit, we lessen any business that has to do with simcha, any kind of joyous transactions. What does that mean? Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Kigayin, for example, liknois clay kesef. Let's say you and your wife decided that you're going to go out and you're going to buy a beautiful new candelabra. Don't do that during the 9 days. That's a very joyous purchase, to buy a beautiful piece of silver. Or let's say you're making a chasana and you need the tzarche chuppah, you need to buy things for the chasana, v'chadoima, or anything similar to that. So these are purchases that we make, and we're very besimcha when we make these purchases. These are joyous transactions. Aval stam masa umaton, but normal business transactions ain't tzarech l'mayit klal. These opinions hold that we don't have to be mimayit in normal types of business transactions. It's only transactions that have some aspect of simcha to them that we have to restrict during the 9 days. That's the first opinion brought down here by the Chavetz Chaim. V'yesh disvirle, but there are others who hold the kol masa umaton, that any business tzarech l'mayit ba'es hazois, we have to restrict and lessen during this time period. And one should only do business that they need to do for the sake of their parnasa. So whatever they need to do to make a living and put food on the table, that they're allowed to do. But what they don't have to do, strictly speaking, for their parnasa, they should avoid. Chavetz Chaim says that it is thus implied in Siman Tavkuf Nun Daled, the end of Sifchaf Beis, that we should restrict and lessen all business transactions. Farak imhu yurid, if the person is a wholesaler who does large transactions at one time, so he does a limited amount of transactions, but his transactions are large, so then any transaction that he misses is a davar avud. Then you could say that this would be mutter, Pri Megadim suggests, because then it's a real davar avud. It's a significant loss if he cannot do the transactions now during the 9 days. And therefore, v'shari b'chal inyan, it would be mutter, imu maitzi az, this is a new halacha, v'shari b'chal inyan, imu maitzi az b'zal yaiser. Certainly, if it's a business transaction that you want to do now because you found merchandise extra cheap, that would be mutter. Says the Chavetz Chaim, ubizmanenu, nowadays, and if you look in the Sharet Zion, he brings this down from the Marshal, the Bach, the Taz, the Eliyah Rabbah. He says, nowadays, nagu lahakel b'chal zeh, the minig is to be lenient with this prohibition, b'shum da'kal nechshav keis kidei parnasasenu, because nowadays all types of transactions that are being done are generally considered to be kidei parnasasenu. Okay, continues the Mechaber in Sif Beis by the Ois Katan Yud Beis for the Mishnah Berurah, 2 lines off the bottom, near the middle of the line. So first, the Mechaber said that we restrict business activity during these days. Now, says the Mechaber, ubebinyan shel simcha. We also restrict any type of construction that has to do with simcha. Kigayin, for example, beis chasnus libnoi. If somebody was building a chasana house for his son, the Gemara brings down that it was the minig when somebody married off a son, they would build a bayis, they would build a house. Maybe that was the house that the chassan and the kala would live in. They would make a chuppah by the house. So this was a joyous construction project. So we don't do a binyan shel simcha, kigayin beis chasnus livnoi, ay binyan shel tzior v'kior, or any kind of decorative construction project. Tzior and kior are different types of decorations. It could be not so much moldings. Moldings nowadays, when we put moldings in a room, we take separate pieces of wood and we attach them to the wall. In those days, it was more they would form designs on the plaster work that was done in the house. But tzir and kior, these are construction projects that are not functional. They're decorative. So that's the binyan shel simcha. We don't do that. It's not a functional need. It's something we're only doing for decoration purposes. Ubinitiyah shel simcha. We also restrict planting that's being done just for simcha purposes. Kigain avravniki shel malachim, a tree that was built for a king, or that was planted for a king. What does that mean? There was a minig that when the king would have a son, a prince was born, they would plant a tree on the day of his birth, and then that tree would grow, and one day the son would ascend to the throne. Let's say he's 50, 60, 70 years old, and he ascends to the throne. Now you would have a very mature tree, which you could cut down, and you could use the wood to build him a throne. So that was the Avravniki Shel Malachim. Now, certainly not everybody plants an Avravniki Shel Malachim, so the Mechaber explains that the term Avravniki Shel Malachim is also used in another way. Shenoitim Litzeil. These are trees that are planted only for shade purposes. Lehistoifeif Betzilai. It's a garden that you're planting to have beautiful shade trees that you could go stroll underneath. Oimine Hadas, Omine Aholim, or different types of myrtle bushes or aloe bushes. These are fragrant bushes. So what we're speaking about over here is planting some kind of an orchard or a garden, which is a luxury item. It's someplace to go outside and take a stroll, someplace to go outside and enjoy the shade or the fragrance. So these are things that are definitely luxuries and extras. And those kind of construction projects are not appropriate for the time period from Rosh Chodesh to Tisha B'Av. Says the Mishnah Berurah back at Chav Daled Amud Aleph. He's cutting Yud Beis. Excuse me. We're almost there. Says the Chavetz Chaim, binyan shel simcha, we restrict any kind of binyan shel simcha. V'hu adin, the same halacha would apply. Kol binyan she'ein tzarich lo l'dirasai. Any construction project that you're not doing for your living needs. You're not doing them for strictly speaking for the needs that you have of shelter. You want to extend your living room. You want to extend your kitchen. That's not something that's a dira requirement. You're doing it laharvacha ba'alma, to have more space, to have extras. If you're busting out of your house and you need to extend the house to add on a bedroom because you need more bedrooms, or you have elderly parents that maybe are moving in with you, so that's tzarich of dira. But if you're finishing your basement to make a playroom, or something of that nature, that's not a tzarich d'dirasai, that's harvacha ba'alma, and that is aser. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Let's say you hired a contractor before Rosh Chodesh and you gave him the job b'kablanos, like we've learned before. Kablanos means you're paying him X amount for the job, and he doesn't have a deadline when he has to do it. So now he's going to do it according to his own schedule. We know all too well how good contractors are at doing your job according to their schedule. So he's going to work when it's good for him to work. He's not working when you want him to work. Then mutter b'koil, then the contractor is allowed to come and do any kind of work for you at all. Fa'afilu b'tisha b'av atzmai, he's even allowed to work on Tisha B'Av itself, because in this case, he's working on that schedule for his own purposes. He's not doing it for you. You didn't hire him to work during the 9 days. You didn't hire him to work on Tisha B'Av. You hired him to get the job done. Now is when he has availability, so now he's coming for his own benefit and doing the work then. That's mutter. Fuadin, similarly, says the Chavetz Chaim, im katzatz im anachri bekablanus l'tzayer beisai. If you hired a non-Jew b'kablanos, again, you hired him by the job to come paint your house. So you made a contract with a contractor. You're paying him $5,000 to paint your house. He he's allowed to come paint during the 9 days. Even on Tisha B'Av, he's allowed to come paint. If he's doing it based on his own schedule, not that you hired him, that he has to finish it by a certain time, or you hired him specifically to work during that time period. Nevertheless, if the guy shows up and you can say, look, I'll give you $50, if that's the davar mu'it for you. For some people, $50 is a lot of money. If you could pay him off with a small amount of money, sheyamtin ad achar Tisha B'Av, he said, look, I know that you had availability today, so for you it works very well to do the job today. This is not a time that we like to do work. Here's $50 for the inconvenience. Go do a different job today. Come back after the 9 days. It says the Chavetz Chaim, Tavay Alav Bracha. Chavetz Chaim says there should be a bracha by you. Ubeis HaKnesses mutter to have a mitzvah derabim, and as far as doing construction in the Beis HaKnesses, that's mutter during the 9 days because that's a mitzvah derabim. Whenever the Chavetz Chaim says Tavay Alav Bracha, there's a short story that I like to say over, and that is that my wife has a cousin whose shver was a Talmud of the Chavetz Chaim's. He learned in Radin. He passed away not all that long ago. He passed away several years ago. And he told us once, he was over 100 years of age when he passed away, and he was completely sharp, and he was relatively healthy. People would ask him about Meha Arachta Yamim, why were you Zeichet to Arichas Yamim? And he would tell people, I know why I was Zeichet to Arichas Yamim. It's very simple. He said that the Chavetz Chaim in Radin used to keep his talis and tefillin in the Bis Medrash. And one day the Chavetz Chaim came in before Shachris, and he couldn't find his talis and tefillin. The non-Jew who would clean the Bis Medrash had taken the Chavetz Chaim's talis and tefillin and put them up on top of a svarim shrunk. And the Chavetz Chaim was very short. The Chavetz Chaim couldn't reach. So this fellow was there in the Bis Medrash. He went, climbed up on a chair. He got the Chavetz Chaim his talis and tefillin, and when he gave the Chavetz Chaim his talis and tefillin, the Chavetz Chaim took his hand and said, "Sollst du sein gesund? You should be well. You should be healthy." He said, "I listened to the bracha and I said Amen." So I said Amen to a bracha of the Chavetz Chaim's. It came true. So he had Arichas Yamim. He was healthy. Soll sein gesund. He was taka healthy. So when the Chavetz Chaim says over here Tavay Alav Bracha, you could be sure that if the Chavetz Chaim says Tavay Alav Bracha, and you heed the words of the Chavetz Chaim, then the Chavetz Chaim says Tavay Alav Bracha, you'll have a bracha. No, Amen. If somebody does this, he should have a bracha for the Chavetz Chaim, and then maybe he too will live till over 100 years of age in good health. Miras Hashem, everybody should enjoy good health, which is an especially valuable bracha in this time period that we're living through. The Rebbeinu Shalom should be megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. The schus of Limud HaTorah should be megan on Gans Klal Yisrael. We should be zeichet to Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnas, and Gesund, and we should be zeichet to the Bias Gal Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Be well.